Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode with your girl, Audrey Codner-Gibson from ACG Math Tutoring. Hopefully, you guys are doing all right. Well, I'm about to get ready to get started with today's lesson. All right, everyone. So for today, we're going to be looking at the midpoint formula. So last time we looked at the distance of 2 points. Now we're going to kind of figure out where is the midpoint of that segment. So we're going to be doing our Common Core standards, which is A-APR 0.7 and A-REI 0.2. So let's talk about reviewing what we did last time, which is the distance formula of these 2 points, which is 2, -3, and 8 and 7. So as you can see, we have our distance formula, which is the difference of our x's squared plus the difference of our y's squared. So if you recall, we're going to label our points. So since this is my first point, that'll be my x sub 1 and my y sub 1. And this is my second point, so that's my x sub 2 and my y sub 2. And all we're going to do is plug that information into the formula. So I'm going to bring it on over here. So I'm looking at the difference of my x's squared. So my x sub 2 is 8 minus my x sub 1, which is 2, plus the difference of my y squared. So we have my x sub 2, which is 7, minus my x or my y sub 1, which is -3. Notice I put the -3 inside of a parenthesis because it's not 7 minus 3, it's 7 minus -3. So you're replacing this whole y sub 1 with that -3. Okay, so that's the only thing that's being replaced. So as we recall, when you minus a negative, it's actually going to turn to a positive. If you think of it this way, a negative times a negative will give me a positive answer. So now we're going to start simplifying. So we have 8 minus 2, so that gives me 6 squared, plus 7 plus 3, so that gives me 10, and that's going to be squared. So now we're at the 6 squared. Remember, 6 squared is the same as my multiplying of my base to itself 2 times. It's not going to be 2 times 6. That exponent is telling you how many times you're multiplying the base. So we have 6 times 6, which gives me 36. And the same thing is going to happen with the 10 squared. That's 10 times 10. And that gives me 100. So you have 36 plus 100. So that will give me the square root of 136. So we did this a little bit earlier. We can see if we can break this down. We want to break down that square root of 136 so we can have that perfect prime combination. So if you have a list of your perfect square roots, they'll be best if you could start dividing by the original number, which is the 136. So 136, if I divide it by 4, I get a 34. And you're probably saying, well, 34, you can divide that by 2, but is 2 a prime or a perfect number? 2 is prime. 2 is the first prime number, not 1, because the definition of a prime number is 1 and the number that multiplies together to give us that number. So only way I can get a 2 through multiplication is if I multiply 1 and 2. That's it. If I switch it around to 2 and 1, it's still the same number as 1 and 2, regardless of what comes first. So I have the square root of 4. That's perfect. That will give me 2 because 2 times 2 will give me 4. And since we're looking at a positive difference or distance, we are only looking at the positive answer, okay? Now, the square root of 34, a lot of people are like, oh, well, you can break that down. And if I recall, that would give me 2 and 17. Both 2 and 17, they're both prime numbers. So I can't break those down at all. because the only thing multiples that'll give me that is 2 times 1 and 17 times 1 to give me those answers. So since I can't break it down, this square root of 34, I'm going to bring it down. So if you ever get a chance and you're looking at your assessment or you're looking at your classwork and your teacher says, okay, round to the nearest 100th position. So that's when you're going to take out your handy dandy calculator and you're going to type in the square root of 136. And in this case, it gives me 11.66190379. But if I'm rounding to the 100th position, which is this second 6, I need to look at the 1000th position. If it's 5 and above, I'm going to give it a shove. That means I'm going to add 1 to the 6. If it's 4 and below, I'm going to leave it alone. That means I'm just going to keep the numbers. So I'm going to say my answer is approximately 11.66. So either we go with the 2 and the square root of 34, or we can go with the approximation, which is the 11.66. Either one should be your correct answer. Okay, so since we're looking at distance, I would probably say you might want to go with the approximation, but if they do ask for the exact answer, stay with the radicals. Okay, so at the end of today's lesson, you should be able to say to yourself, I can find the midpoint between 2 points. So we're going to look at some guided notes, we're going to look at some practice problems, and we're going to finish off with an exit ticket. If you are new to my channel and you're like, oh, this seems pretty cool, I do this each and every lesson. So I always go over the exit ticket from the previous lesson, and then I dive into some guided notes, some helpful hints, some examples, and also some practice problems, just to reassure that you can do this math, okay? So let's start off with some of our helpful hints. As you can see, this formula for midpoint is very similar to what we just did for the distance formula. Main difference, one, we're not taking the difference of my x and my y's, we're actually taking the sum of them. And then we're going to divide them by 2. Because if I have the full length, if I take it and I divide it in half, whoop, I will get right here in the middle, okay? And that's our goal. We want to find the midpoint of any segment. So helpful hint, just like we did before, you want to label your points, your x sub 1, your y sub 1, your x sub 2, and your y sub 2. And then you're going to plug it into this formula. Now notice, there's no square roots. What we're trying to find is the coordinate that is the exact middle of whatever that segment is. Okay, so that's the whole point of all this. So let's show through example. So we want to find the midpoint between -3, 2, and 5 and 4. So -3, that's going to be my x sub 1, and 2 is going to be my y sub 1, because those are the coordinates of my first point. Then I have my second point, so that'll be my x sub 2, which is 5, and my y sub 2, which is 4. And I'm going to plug it into the formula. So we have my sum of my x's. So we have -3 plus 5, divide by 2, and we're going to square it. Okay. And then for my y's, we're going to take the 2 plus the 4, divide by 2, and then we're going to square it. Okay, so like the distance formula, we did the square root. Now that we're trying to move into that midpoint, we are going to just, no more square roots. We're still going to square it, okay? Just like how we did for the difference or the distance formula, but we don't have the square root anymore. So we still have those squares going on. So now let's just do some math. -3 plus 5, that will give me a positive 2 over 2. And 2 divided by 2, that will give me 1. And 1 squared is just 1. So my x value is going to be 1. Now let me do my y value. So we have 2 plus 4, that gives me 6. 6 divided by 2, that will give me 3. And 3 squared will give me 9. So the ordered pair for my midpoint is going to be 1, 9. That's it. I got excited, I snorted. So that's it. You know, it just seems like that's all we have to do. You take the sum of your x's, divide by 2, square it. Take the sum of your y's, divide by 2, square it. That's it. Okay, let's try another. So we want to find the midpoint of 4, -12, and -8 and 1. So we have our x of 1, our y sub 1, x sub 2, our y sub 2. Okay, remember, ordered pairs always have an x and a y. Okay, so now we're going to do our 4 plus -8 divided by 2, and that will be squared. And then for the y's, we have -12 plus 1 divided by 2, and we're going to square. All right, so 4 plus -8, that gives me a -4 over 2. And then -4 divided by 2 gives me a -2. Now this is the one that gets a lot of people. What's -2 squared? Just like how we did before, notice the -2 is inside the parentheses. So that means I'm doing a -2 times a -2. That's going to give me a +4. Okay. If that negative was outside the parenthesis, which is not because we're doing everything inside of a parenthesis, but if it was something like this will give you a -4. Because once I square the 2, that's 2 times 2, that gives me 4. And then 4 times the negative, that's why that will be -4. So if you're putting this in your calculator, you have to put that -2 in parentheses in order to square it. All right, so now let's do our y's. So we have -12 plus 1, that gives me -11 over 2, and we're going to square. So -11 squared, oh, it looks like it's going to be a fraction. We could have it as a decimal, but why not have it as its full state? Keep it as a fraction. So if I'm going to square everything, that means I'm going to square the -11, and I'm going to square the 2 as well. So -11, that's a -11 times -11, that gives me 121. And 2 squared, as we mentioned, will give me 4. So my ordered pair is going to be 4, 121 fourths. If for some reason your teacher wanted it as a decimal, what are you going to do? You're going to take that 121 and you're going to divide it by 4. So that would give you 30.25 or 30 and 25 hundredths. So either one of these will be your correct answer. Okay. I feel like the official answer will be the 121 fourths because it's completed. Whereas this one, if you wanted to do some rounding, I wouldn't do any rounding when it comes to like the whole distance, unless you're doing your final answer. Okay. So I want you to practice. So if you want to pause, go ahead and pause and try this problem by yourself. All right, so you have your x1, y1, x sub 2, y sub 2. So I have the sum of my x's. So I got 6 plus -6 over 2, and I'm going to square it. Then I have 1 plus -2 divided by 2. Then I'm going to square it. So 6 plus -6, that gives me a 0. When the signs are opposite, I'm really subtracting. So now here, that means you got 0 squared, which we all know that's going to be 0. So that's your x value. Now for your y value, 1 plus -2, that's -1 over 2. And we're going to square it. Oh, it's another fraction. So that means that -1 we're going to square that. And the 2, we're also going to square that. So -1 squared, that's -1 times -1, which gives me 1. And 2 squared, that gives me 4. So my ordered pair is going to be 0 and 1/4. Or if we need it as a decimal, so 1 out of 4 quarters, that'll be 25 cents. So 0.25. Okay? So I really think that yes, you can actually say, yes, I can find the midpoint between 2 given points. Remember, it's the sum of your x's divided by 2, and you have to square it. Okay, don't forget to square it at the end. So the same thing's happening with your y value. So it's going to be the sum of your y's divided by 2, and then you have to square it. So as we already did the review of the exit ticket for the distance formula. We definitely did some guided notes and some examples, and we did a practice problem. So now let's get with the exit. So what I would like for you to do is find the midpoint of the points 5, 8, and 7 and -3. So like always, I had fun doing this. Hopefully you enjoyed yourself and hopefully you learned something. Maybe you learned that, hey, I can do this stuff. Just the mere fact that you're building up your confidence is amazing to me. Now, if you like this video, go ahead, like it, subscribe to it, comment on it, share it, okay? Make sure that if you know somebody else that also struggles with math and they need this and they're like, oh, I saw this lady, she's pretty cool, you should look into her. Go ahead and share this video, all right? If you're thinking about, I like this person, but I wish I can get more one-to-one, you can contact me. I will put all my contact information at the very end of this video. And I do have one-to-one and also small group tutoring. So if you need any assistance, please contact me. And like always, guys, I'm so proud of you. Continue to build your confidence and start making connections. And don't forget, you are loved. Take care now. Bye.